A group of friends, Lily, Mark, Anna, and I, decided to go camping in Ravenswood, a secluded forest with a reputation for strange occurrences. We were skeptical of the rumors, but intrigued by the adventure. We arrived in the late afternoon, set up our tents, and built a campfire. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the silence. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the darkness itself was watching us. To pass the time, we decided to tell ghost stories. Mark, always the storyteller, began with a local legend about a witch who once lived in Ravenswood. According to the tale, she was hunted by the townspeople and executed, but not before cursing the forest. Those who entered were said to hear her whispers and see her shadow in the moonlight. As Mark finished his story, we heard a faint whispering sound coming from the trees. We laughed nervously, assuming it was the wind, but the unease settled deep within us. We decided to turn in for the night, hoping sleep would come easily. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching on leaves. I sat up, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a soft, rhythmic tapping. I peeked out of my tent and saw Mark standing by the fire, staring into the darkness. "Mark, what are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't respond. I stepped out of the tent and walked toward him. As I got closer, I realized his eyes were wide open, yet he seemed unaware of my presence. Suddenly, he turned and walked into the forest, the tapping sound following him. "Lily, Anna, wake up," I called out, trying to rouse the others. They emerged from their tents, confused and groggy. I explained what I saw, and we decided to follow Mark, worried he might be sleepwalking. We grabbed our flashlights and ventured into the forest, calling his name. The deeper we went, the stronger the tapping sound grew. It seemed to echo from all directions, making it impossible to locate its source. After what felt like hours, we found Mark standing in a small clearing, staring at an old, decrepit cabin. The cabin looked as if it had been abandoned for centuries, its wooden beams rotting and covered in moss. Mark approached the door, and to our horror, it creaked open on its own. He stepped inside without hesitation. "Lily, Anna, we need to get him out of there," I said, my voice trembling. We followed him into the cabin. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay. Dust motes floated in the beams of our flashlights. Mark stood in the center of the room, facing an ancient cracked mirror. His reflection stared back at him, but something was wrong. The reflection's eyes were dark pits, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Before we could react, the reflection stepped out of the mirror, reaching for Mark. The tapping sound grew deafening, reverberating through the cabin. We grabbed Mark and pulled him away, the reflection's fingers barely missing him. As we dragged him outside, the cabin door slammed shut with a force that shook the ground. Breathless and terrified, we ran back to our campsite. Mark seemed to snap out of his trance, but he couldn't remember anything. We quickly packed our gear and left Ravenswood, vowing never to return. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the shadow of a figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching us leave. The rhythmic tapping echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the night we encountered the cursed spirit of Ravenswood. On a warm summer weekend, my friends Emily, Jack, Mia, and I decided to go camping in the remote mountains of Whispering Peaks. The mountains were known for their breathtaking views and challenging trails, but also for the eerie legends of a monstrous creature that roamed the heights. We were thrill seekers, always ready for a new adventure. So we shrugged off the warnings and set out. We arrived at the base of the mountains early in the morning, packed our gear, and began the steep ascent. The trail was rugged, with jagged rocks and dense thickets, but the stunning vistas kept us motivated. By late afternoon, we reached a plateau with a clear view of the surrounding peaks, a perfect spot to set up camp. As night fell, we built a campfire, and settled in. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky was a canopy of stars. We shared stories and roasted marshmallows, but a sense of unease lingered in the back of our minds. The mountains were silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. After a long day of hiking, we were exhausted and decided to turn in early. The fire flickered and cast long shadows as we crawled into our tents. I was drifting off to sleep when a low, guttural growl jolted me awake. My heart raced as I listened intently, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. The growl came again, closer and more menacing. I crept out of my tent and saw Emily standing by the dying fire, her face pale with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, Jack and Mia emerged from their tents, equally alarmed. We huddled together, flashlights in hand, scanning the darkness. The growling grew louder, echoing off the mountains. Without warning, a massive figure emerged from the trees. It was over 7 feet tall, with matted fur, glowing red eyes, and sharp, jagged teeth. The creature's appearance was like nothing we had ever seen yore. A horrifying amalgamation of man and beast. "It's real," Jack muttered, his voice shaking. The creature let out a bone-chilling roar and charged at us. We scrambled to grab our packs and ran up the mountain trail, the monster hot on our heels. The terrain was treacherous, but adrenaline propelled us forward. We reached a narrow ledge, overlooking a steep drop. With nowhere else to go, we clung to the rocky wall, hoping the creature would lose interest. The monster stopped at the edge, its red eyes boring into us. It snarled, baring its teeth, and took a step back. Just when we thought it might leave, the creature lunged, swiping at us with its claws. We dodged, barely avoiding its grasp. In the chaos, Mia slipped and fell, hanging precariously over the edge. Jack and I grabbed her arms, pulling her back to safety. Realizing it couldn't reach us, the creature let out a frustrated howl and retreated into the forest. We stayed on the ledge, too terrified to move, until the first light of dawn broke the darkness. Exhausted and shaken, we carefully made our way back to the campsite, packed up our gear, and descended the mountain as quickly as possible. The memory of the monster haunted us, a reminder of the terror that lurked in the mountains of Whispering Peaks. We never spoke of the encounter again, but the fear remained. We had faced a monster and survived, but the knowledge that it was still out there, somewhere in the mountains, was a burden we would carry forever. It was a crisp, cool fall weekend when Emily and I decided to go camping in Redwood Forest. The trees were ablaze with autumn colors, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and fallen leaves. We'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks, eager to escape the bustle of city life and enjoy some time together in nature. We arrived at the trailhead in the late afternoon, packed our gear, and began the hike to our favorite secluded campsite. The forest was quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. As we walked, we admired the vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows of the foliage, feeling a sense of peace and tranquility. By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. We quickly set up our tent and built a campfire, enjoying the warmth as the temperature dropped. After a simple dinner, we settled in for the night, talking and laughing by the fire. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to grow more silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Emily and I decided to turn in early, tired from the hike. We crawled into our tent, snuggling close for warmth. Just as we were drifting off to sleep, a distant rhythmic chanting broke the silence. I sat up, straining to listen. The chanting was faint but unmistakable, echoing through the trees. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Emily. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with unease. "What is that? It sounds like people." Curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to investigate. Grabbing our flashlights, We ventured into the darkness, following the sound of the chanting. The deeper we went, the louder and more distinct the voices became. We moved cautiously, the beams of our flashlights cutting through the shadows. After what felt like hours of walking, we came upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, surrounded by hooded figures holding torches. The chanting grew louder and more intense as the figures circled the altar, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. Emily and I crouched behind a large tree, watching in horror. One of the figures stepped forward, raising a large, ornate dagger. The chanting reached a fever pitch as the figure raised the dagger above their head, preparing to strike. "We need to get out of here," I whispered urgently. But before we could move, a twig snapped under Emily's foot, and the chanting abruptly stopped. All eyes turned toward our hiding spot, and the hooded figures began to advance, torches casting eerie shadows on their faces. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Emily's hand. We bolted through the forest, the cultists in hot pursuit. The forest, once peaceful and inviting, now seemed like a maze of terror. The chanting resumed, echoing through the trees, urging us to keep moving. We ran until our legs burned and our lungs screamed for air, finally finding a small cave to take refuge in. We huddled together, listening as the chanting faded into the distance. Hours passed, and we didn't dare move, waiting for the first light of dawn to break. When morning finally arrived, we cautiously emerged from the cave and made our way back to the campsite. We packed up our gear as quickly as possible, eager to leave the forest behind. As we hiked back to the trailhead, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the memory of the chanting and the hooded figures haunting us. Emily and I never spoke of what we had seen that night, but the terror stayed with us. We had ventured into Redwood Forest, seeking peace, and found something far darker, EOR, a sinister cult hidden deep in the woods, performing ancient and forbidden rituals. The memory of that night would forever linger, a reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the light of the campfire.